Greetings, you deep-sea dwelling motion mollusks. Sorry, I know you're probably not a mollusk, but I'm sticking with the theme, because today we're doing a procedural jellyfish. In this video, we'll be modeling, rigging, and animating it. So let's dive in. Let's start by making a jellyfish then. I'm going to pop into the front view, and then I want I'm going to use a B-spline actually, and let's just start by making a cube here for scale, so I don't make the jellyfish too big or too small. And then I'll just start doodling a shape that looks like a jellyfish cut in two. Their heads usually are quite round, if you can call it a head, and then it comes in a little bit and then out in sort of skirt shape, and it goes around, form the inside, and then it's just a little bit thicker near the top. That looks like a fang or maybe a claw, but basically that looks like a jellyfish cut in half. Let's just make sure that the center points are in the actual center. Move it slightly, other than that, it's actually fine. So now we can jump back into perspective view, and I don't need the cube anymore. What I'm going to do with this spline is select it and then lathe the shit out of it. And just like that, we have a jellyfish shape. Now it looks pretty good, but I want to use a subdivision surface on this later. So I'm going to turn the B-spline into an actually linear spline. Now it looks really edgy, doesn't it? Yeah. It looks kind of like a pot, I think. Yeah, turn it upside down and you could put a plant in it. But hey, that's for another tutorial. With this lathe of ours, I would like to create a connect object. And I'm not actually going to put the lathe in the connect object. I'm just going to move the connect object after the lathe in the hierarchy. And then I'm going to drag the lathe as the object reference in our connect object. And that just hides away our lathe. So we can make that invisible, but we still have our geometry. And we can add effectors and stuff to it. So I'm going to turn down the tolerance for the weld so that the edge bits aren't accidentally connected or anything. Because that could give us a really interesting surprise further down the line that we do not want. Anywho, now I want to change the geometry of this slightly, so I'm going to pick a deformer, the correction deformer, that's the one, and I'll add that to our connect object. So now, we're still keeping it procedural, but we can tweak individual points as much as we like. And trust me, we like. So now I'm just going to select every other pair of points around this edge. So with these points selected, I'm just going to move them down about that much. And that's just going to give it a bit of a wavy edge around the jellyfish. So next, I'm going to press UL and get the loop selection up. Then I'll go through and select every other loop around the jellyfish. So that's good, but now I've got too many points selected. So I'll use the regular selection tool to deselect all the points on top of the jellyfish. And then I will go through, for these ones underneath, I'm going to go into the front view again and select the rectangle selection tool and turn off only select visible. And then deselect these ones at the bottom. And so then I'm ready to move these points up slightly. And that's just going to make it a little bit wavy on the inside as well. It's going to make it look more interesting when we shade it later. And now I'm ready to move this into a subdivision surface. And we can see that we have our jellyfish shape back. We can see the nice wavy surface on the inside and the nice wavy bits on the skirt. But as you can see, we also have some weird things happening with our Phong tag. And that's only because it's using the Phong tag from our lathe object, which looks like a pot, and applies that to our smooth object. So we just need to move the Phong tag from our lathe onto our subdivision surface. And it's fixed. But I don't quite like how it looks like a mushroom, so I'm going to select the top point here and just move it down, flatten the top a little bit. I think the whole thing kind of looks a bit too high, so I think I want to change that. And because it's still procedural, we can go into our original spline and just select all the points and then just slightly flatten it a little bit. And straight away, it just updates throughout our entire procedural chain. And I must say, that is the beauty of keeping it procedural. You can just tweak things, as long as you're careful about not adding geometry to it, because that can really give some strange results. Alright, time for another connector object. And this time, I'm going to add the subdivision surface in there. I'm just going to make sure the subdivision is set to 2 for both editor and render, so it doesn't add geometry when we render it. And then I can use it as the object reference for a connect object, and I don't want that one to weld. So now I'll use the connect object to animate this jellyfish. We all know more or less how a jellyfish moves. It squashes and squishes, and the perfect deformer for that would be the bulge deformer. And as you can see, immediately we have the exact movement a jellyfish would make, don't we? Yeah, no, we don't. I'm going to scale this up on the y-axis and set the strength to -50, and that just makes it smoother. But the key to this whole animation is in the fall-off. If I create a linear fall-off along the y-axis, the negative y-axis, and I set that to 100%, we can then draw a little spline here, just so we make it start quick and then fade slowly. Let's actually make that a little bit softer, just like that. Then we can use our spline animation parameter to have this automatically animate at a given speed. If it's set to 100%, this spline sort of moves across the entire fall-off once every second, and if the speed is set to half that, that takes 2 seconds. But as you can see, at the moment it doesn't do either of those things. I'm not sure exactly why that happens, but I know that if we add a jiggle, which we want anyway, it works just fine. And we get this lovely jellyfish animation happening once every 2 seconds thanks to our spline animation speed. Oh hell yeah, that's the stuff. Unfortunately, this stuff is a bit harsh at the moment, so I'm just going to extend the fall off a bit on the y-axis so it's a little bit softer and it just looks like it jumps. That's fine for now. We're just going to tweak that in the jiggle deformer to smooth it out a little bit. The basic jelly move is there, that's kind of how it moves, it's just a bit extreme. So in our jiggle deformer, I want to turn down the stiffness, I'm going to put it to 5, and then structural all the way down to 0. And that just gives us this lovely smooth movement. And then I just want just a little bit fewer springs. And look at that, smooth as silk. What I want to do now is to animate this along a spline. I think that's a rather simple way of making it move the way you want it. So I'm just going to jump into the front view again and freehand just this simple spline. Something like that, just a little S-curve. That looks, yeah, I could see a jellyfish move like that. But let's swap that Bezier curve into a B-spline, just to make it that little bit smoother. And just because I can be bothered, I'll go through and just move these points to smooth the whole thing out. There, done. Now let's add ourselves a spline wrap for this. I'm going to add it after the bulge deformer, but before the jiggle. Then I'll just go ahead and drag the spline into the spline reference of the spline wrap. And we can just press play and a couple of things. So it does actually look lovely, but there are a couple of issues with it. First one would be that it's set to fit to spline and we wanted to keep its length. And it's also wrapping along the wrong axis. We wanted to wrap along the y-axis. And then we just get it facing the right way around. Another time has come to animate this, and it appears that the first swoosh happens around 25 frames in. So that's when we want this little fella to start swimming. And I'm going to do that by animating the offset in the spline wrap. So I'll set that keyframe and then jump 2 seconds into the future, because that's what we set our spline animation speed to be. And then just offset it slightly on the spline. I'm going to set it to about 5%. And now it swims when it swooshes. Now I'll just do that for these 250 frames. So now I've done that for the entire range, and it's just slowly swimming now for 250 frames. But I want the initial swooshes to give a bit more speed to the jellyfish. So I'll bring up the timeline window, because that's where we keep all our lovely keyframes. You can see how it matches up every time it takes a swoosh. There's a keyframe. And to make that look a bit more natural and organic, I want to click this button to go into F-curves mode, and I select my animation track, and we can see what the curves look like. Right now it's kind of a straight line upwards, but if we just uncheck auto tangents, we can go in and change the values. And I'll start by changing the left time to something high, like 30, and that controls how quickly it slows down. But because we haven't checked break tangents, that also changes the right value. So that changes how slowly it speeds up. So I'll just simply check the break tangent tick box, and then I can set the write time to something lower, like 10 frames. And that's just going to make it speed up quickly and then slow down slowly. Let's get on with the next row and change the values. Right now, many of them are a bit different, so I'll just start by zeroing those out. So now it just goes from a complete stop to a complete stop in between swooshes. And I want it to continuously move slightly regardless of swoosh. So I'll start by setting the left value to something like -2. And you can see how the curve updates. I think -1 is probably enough. And then for the right value, I'll set it to 0.5. So now it does a swoosh, slows down, and then does another swoosh without ever quite stopping. It does start a bit far down, and I'd like it to move around the middle bit of the spline. So if I just select the keyframes in the F-curves and just move those up, as soon as I let go, the jellyfish is just going to jump into place, because I've just increased the value of all those keyframes all at once. And now the action happens a bit closer to the middle. But I do think our jellyfish almost looks a bit naked, and I think it would really love to have some tentacles. So I would just temporarily disable the spline wrap and the jiggle, just so our jelly moves into place. And then I will add yet another correction object. And I'll drop that one in after the jiggle. And now I can just go through and select some parts where I would like to grow some hairs. So I'm going to press U and L and use the loop selection in polygon mode to select this outer rim here. And then I'm just going to actually make that into a selection. So I'll press V and go into selection and set selection. And that just creates a selection tag on our connect object. Still keeping it procedural. We could still go back and change our original spline if we wanted to, but we don't. So what I'm instead going to do is select this selection tag that we have, go up into the menu, into simulate, into hair objects, and select add hair. That just adds a ton of hair to the selected area on our jellyfish. It does look a bit wild, and that's mostly because the normals on the lathe object are completely off. Luckily, there's a button for that. So I'll just go into the lathe object, and I will check the tick box which says flip normals. If we select our hair now, we can see that it's actually pointing the other way, and it looks a little bit better now, but it still looks a bit weird, and that is because we actually changed the geometry when we flipped the normals. And with this whole thing being procedural, that actually messed up our selection, so we're going to need to redo that one. Go back into our correction object and just reselect that edge we had. That's the one. And with the old selection tag selected, I'm going to set a new selection, and that just overwrites the other one. So now our hair is quite neat and tidy. So kind of pointing in weird directions though. And that we can fix in the hair object. So I'm first going to tidy up, put this down here and rename it edge. And then go into the guides and set the root from vertex to polygon center. So now our hair is in a nice ring around our lovely jellyfish. It's a little bit too long, so I'm going to shorten that. The length to about 50. And it is wagging out of control. And that's something we fix in forces. We change the gravity from -9.81 up to about -1, so it doesn't gravitate quite as much. And to make it look a bit more underwater, I'm going to create a friction, which is a particle force. I'm going to set it quite high, probably at least 100, maybe up to 200. And that's just going to emulate the water resistance. Yeah, I think I need it up to 200. And personally, I think this looks a lot more underwater than it did just a few moments ago. If we render this now, the hair looks silly. There's too many, so I'm going to go into the hair tab on the hair object and turn the amount down. But it still looks quite silly. We're going to fix that in the next tutorial when we shade this whole jellyfish. But for now, we're going to create some more tentacly tentacles. You know those middle ones that some jellyfish have? Yeah, I want those for my jellyfish. So again, I will make a selection on our correction object. I'm going to make the selection somewhere in the middle. I'll use the selection tool, make it slightly smaller, and just select the middle bit, and then press U and Y to expand that selection slightly. And then I just want to completely flatten that area, just make it completely flat. And then I will just turn that into a new selection. I'm going to name that selection mid, because that is the middle. And the other selection, I'm going to name that one edge, because that was the edge selection. With the mid selection selected, I'm going to go up to simulate again into hair objects and add some more hair. Boom, we got some hair in there. They're way too short, so I'm going to set the length to a lot more than that. Maybe about 250. And still a bit short, maybe even 300. Yeah. So that's about a good length, but I think there's way too many of them. So I'm going to turn that down to at the most 10, and the distribution's a bit off. So I want to scroll down here to editing and just click the regrow button, and that's going to redistribute the hairs. And that just looks a bit more proper. So now if we play this through, we can see that they're hanging down. But just like with the other ones, they're affected too much by gravity, and that is something we changed in forces. So I'll go back into forces and turn gravity up to -1. One problem we might have with these is it looks like they might intersect with each other, especially when it moves. And that's something we can fix. We just need to turn on hair-to-hair forces, and then I will turn up the distance to about 25 centimeters. And as you can see, they kind of drift apart now, keeping sort of a safe distance. Now I think it's about time to turn the spline wrap back on to see this jelly in action. It's starting to look quite nice actually. The movements still look a bit strict, and it's not quite random enough, so it doesn't look natural, but we'll get to that. Let me just first rename this so it's called tenties, because these are the tenties in the middle. And if we give this a render as is, you can see there's a shit ton of hair in the middle. Too many in fact. So I'll go into the hair tab and change the roots to be as guides, and that's just going to make sure the hair is exactly the same as the guides. But the fact of the matter is we don't want it to be hair at all, so we're going to go into generate and uncheck the render hairs option, and in the type we're going to change that from none to sweep, which just works the same way as a sweep object would. So now we need a spline to use as a profile for this sweep, and I'm going to use the flower. It's not very often you get to use the flower, is it? So I'm going to go ahead and seize this opportunity. I'm going to turn down the inner radius of the petals, make them a bit more delicate, and I don't want 8 of them, I just want about 3, and then turn down the inner radius a bit more to make them even thinner. The adaptive points, I'm going to turn up the angle so we get a bit less points in there. Gotta keep it quick, you know? But once that's done, we can go back into the hair object and drag our freshly created flower into the object reference for the sweep. And now it creates tiny, tiny strands of flower sweeps. They're so tiny, in fact, that you can't really see them. And oddly enough, their scale is controlled through the hair material. So let's go into the corresponding hair material. And all we need to do here is actually change the thickness. I'm going to set that to 10 centimeters for the root and 10 centimeters for the tip. And now we can see, especially if we're into this, we can see that we actually get some proper geometry from this. We can also see that they're on the wrong axis. And that's all thanks to our hair sweeping along the y-axis, and our flower is facing the z-axis. So if we go into the generate tab of the hair object again and set the sweep to sweep along the z-axis, then we can see that we're getting the proper shape that we want. Well, nearly the shape we want. I want it a bit more random, so I'm going to go back into the hair material, and in the thickness I'm going to start drawing a spline. I want it to taper off towards the end, so I'll do that, but in between I want it to kind of wibble wobble a bit, so it's thicker in certain bits and thinner in other bits. That just gives us a little bit more of an interesting shape in these. But now it's actually struggling with the amount of points we have. I'm going to go into the guides tab and just crank up the amount of segments, and that'll just make it more smooth. And I believe we've earned ourselves a playthrough again, and it looks a bit better now. However, it still looks too simple. I mean, it needs that randomness. So let's add another particle force, and this time it's going to be a turbulence. I'll start by just really increasing the strength of it, and we should see how it already affects the hair. Especially if we're moving close, we can see the hair is getting pulled in a few different directions by the turbulence. I think to make it look more like waves, I'll turn up the scale and then set the strength all the way up to 200. And that's what gives the hair this lovely fluid underwater look, like it's being rocked by waves. But what I want to do now is add a tag to our connect object, because with this turbulence, there is a risk that the tentacles are going to go through the head of the jellyfish. So I'll just go into hair and add a hair collider tag. That'll make sure the tentacles stay in their place, and it's also really going to slow our shit down. This is no longer real time. Well, we can get some of that speed back. I just need to go into the edge hair, go into dynamics, and uncheck collisions. And that's really what slows it down the most. Right, let's add some turbulence to the head itself. Make that look a bit more random. Let's duplicate our turbulence. Rename that to Jiggle Turb, because that's going to be in our Jiggle Deformer. In fact, let's start by dragging our turbulence into the Forces tab of our Jiggle Deformer and play it back, and immediately we get this wonderful effect. Obviously, our turbulence is a tad too strong for the Jiggle Deformer, so let's go into the turbulence and turn that way down. And if we jump back to the beginning, we have a bit more of a reasonable result. Still too strong, but we do have some lovely blobby movement now. And I think if I actually just turn up the scale, don't need to turn down the strength, but if I turn up the scale, that's just going to make it look better. Just going to make the jellyfish flow from side to side a bit more. And that's basically the modeling, rigging and animation part of this jellyfish. I might add some more tentacles to it. I'll probably change the edge hairs to sweeps as well. But this is pretty much it. I'll see you next time when we add some materials to this bad boy, or bad girl. I'm not sure. Do jellyfish have genders? That can be your homework till next time. But until that time, I'd like to thank you for your time, and I urge you to stay in motion.
Maestro.